Well, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's panel, Tariff Talk. Today's panel discussions about tariff. I'm Dean Hettenbach. I'm one of the moderators of today's panel, and I'm with the Georgia Manufacturing Extension Partnership, or Georgia MEP, as we like to call it. My focus areas there are supply chain and logistics and technology. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Georgia MEP overall, and then I'll introduce Sandy Lake, who's with the Center of Innovation, co-sponsor of today's panel discussion, who will then turn it over to our panelists to just say a couple items about themselves, and then we'll jump right into the questions. So the Georgia MEP, who are we? Our focus and our mission in life is to advance Georgia manufacturing and distribution. We're state and federally funded, and at the outset, we're consultants. You can see a lot of us there in the photo. We work across multiple different verticals, and ultimately our goal is to help clients, manufacturers, distributors across the state of Georgia to improve their business results. Next slide. We are organized across the state. We cover the whole state of Georgia. The state is organized into 10 regions. Each region has a key contact. That key contact is a regional manager. You can find the regional manager for your specific geography by using the QR code that's currently on the screen, or you can visit our website, gamep.org, and find your regional manager that way as well. Either way, that individual is the person best versed in all the different types of assistance that the Georgia MEP can provide to you, and a key contact for you. Next slide. As I mentioned earlier, we are consultants that work across multiple different verticals. Some of those are listed here. There's a more complete list on our website with more detail. But today we're focused on what's in the lower right, which is noted as supply chain. And under supply chain and logistics, we provide multiple different types of services. We've done projects that help clients with inventory, with technology, with logistics, with supplier management, with supply chain design, and many others. Our projects can range from just a few days to span several months, but we often do what we call discovery sessions, which are free of charge, and that's either online or could be on site with one of our regional managers, where we'll spend some time just listening to your challenges, what you're faced with, and then try to understand how we can best assist you from there. Next slide. So we are part of the national MEP network. Every state has an MEP, and that's important for a couple of reasons. If you're on this call and you're not from Georgia, we can help connect you to your local MEP resources. Other than that, the national network allows us to scale and leverage resources across state boundaries to best address whatever challenges you might have. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sandy Lake for a brief introduction, and then she'll turn it over to the panelists as well.
Good morning. I'm glad to be with you today. My name is Sandy Lake. I'm with the Georgia Center of Innovation, which is a component of the Georgia Department of Economic Development. And within that, we focus in 6 different strategic industries: aerospace, ag tech, energy, IT, advanced manufacturing, and logistics. And I'm the director of the logistics team. We're here as a free resource to you, and I would encourage you to reach out if you have any challenges or issues in any of those strategic industries, but particularly if it relates to logistics and supply chain. We can help you, and that's what we're here to do. And with that, I'll turn it over to Rhett to introduce himself, and would ask the others to introduce themselves as well, and then we'll get started with our questions.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Rhett Willis. I'm president of DJ Powers Company. We're a customs broker, freight forwarder, and global logistics company headquartered here in Savannah. We have offices throughout the East Coast and the Gulf, as well as Europe and China. And we provide global services for accounts in the US and globally as well.
Right, Shannon, would you like to go next?
Hi, I am Shannon Witt. I am the head of compliance and trade programs at Future Forwarding. We're a customs broker, freight forwarder, and foreign trade zone based in Atlanta. I also serve as chairman of the board for the Atlanta International Forwarders and Brokers Association, which is a group of customs brokers and freight forwarders in the Georgia area that are here to help importers with legitimate trade, importers and exporters.
And finally, Rosemary.
Hi, everybody. I'm Rosemary Coates. I'm the founder and executive director of the Reshoring Institute. We've been around for 11 years, helping companies bring manufacturing back to the US. And more recently, we're helping companies evaluate their global manufacturing strategy, which generally includes not only reshoring consideration, but also potential other countries in the world where they might relocate. Most popular is Mexico, as you would imagine. There's a lot of movement there. We are affiliated with 19 universities across the US. We take graduate students, MBAs, and a master's in engineering as our interns, and they help us with our research. We have a huge website with all of our surveys, research, case studies, everything posted on our website, and I'd encourage you to visit that if you're interested in manufacturing in the US or Mexico. And that's reshoringinstitute.org.
All right. Well, thanks to everyone for the introductions. Let's just jump into the questions. We have some for the panel that Sandy and I will be asking, but as Megan mentioned at the front end of the call today, and if you have questions, we'll have some time at the end, but feel free to put your questions in the chat as well. We are moderating that across the call. Well, let's start with the basics. We talk about tariffs. We see a lot about it. What are the key differences? Let's just understand the basics here between tariffs, taxes, duties. What were these used for? What are they used for now? By some estimates, we've generated over $75 billion in tariffs just in the first few months of the year. And who pays that money? So I'll turn this over to Rosemary and then ask Reth to jump in as well.
Okay, so tariffs, of course, are taxes that are placed on imports into the U.S. Duty is the amount that you would pay when you're importing products related to those tariffs or the way things are classified for importation. It all started, though, way back at the beginning of America when duties were used to make imports more expensive, or at least seem more expensive, by taxing the import part of it. Those initial taxes were funding the US government, if you can believe that. Duties and a few other taxes, but essentially duties were funding the entire US government until 1920 when we implemented income tax. So it was a big deal for a long time. Now duties represent a fairly small amount of the U.S. government budget. In terms of the $1 billion or so that's been collected since the beginning of the Trump administration and the imposition of the penalty tariffs, it's kind of questionable where that money has gone. As importers were, of course, all paying those duties by higher prices, and that money is going into the U.S. Treasury Department, so far not being returned to the U.S. citizens. It certainly affects international trade in terms of our relationship with other countries, and is now being used as an administrative tool to deploy the government's policies regarding trade. So instead of just collecting duties and making imports look more expensive, it's really being used as a negotiation tool to get the agenda put forward by the administration. So, for example, tariffs on Mexico are being used to force the addressing drug traffic into the U.S. In China, the tariffs are being used to adjust policies for incoming Chinese, cheap Chinese goods, essentially, and so forth around the world. So there's a shift in collecting money to support the government to today, which is more of a policy approach based on those tariffs.
Great. And Rhett, you want to weigh in as well on some of the, help our audience understand some of the differences between tariffs, duties, and taxes?
Yeah, just Rosemary covered it quite well, but basically the tariffs are the rules by which you determine what the duty rate will be. And the duties, of course, are paid. Some of the taxes, there's one called harbor maintenance fee that's used supposedly to fund port improvements around the country. And that's fairly steady. Merchandise processing fee is another one. Again, in addition to the duties that are paid. And to Rosemary's point, Alexander Hamilton put in the first duties to pay off the war debt from the Revolutionary War. And as she said, it continued to fund the US government. So it has changed a bit. But those are two taxes, the merchandise processing fee and harbor maintenance, that is collected separate from the duties. And those are to specified funds for specified uses.
Thanks, Rhett. I was going to ask, kind of as a follow-on to that, how are the tariff rates determined for different types of goods?
Interesting. The tariff rates are, it's really a political issue, as Rosemary highlighted. The way it works traditionally, Congress would go to the International Trade Commission and determine a duty rate. It has in the past been used. It becomes political in that constituents within the U.S. may feel that the imports are harming their business. They can go to their congressman and say, hey, I need some help. You know, this stuff's coming in real cheap. We need to put a duty on it to equalize the market in the U.S. for domestic production. Also, as mentioned, it has become political, both you know, on a product by product, it is political. Again, Congress goes to the International Trade Commission. International Trade Commission goes to Customs and says, here are the rules, you need to enforce it. They've now added country issues, again, political. If we want to have a more favorable trade with certain countries, they can then give them a free trade status, such as Korea, Israel, etc. Again, it is a political issue. Congress determines that. International Trade Commission writes the rules, and Customs enforces them.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And, you know, most of our, we mentioned this earlier, most of the Georgia MEP's clients are small to mid-sized manufacturers who may not have had to deal with tariffs before, but they may be impacted now either through their suppliers, pricing or availability. What would you suggest, or where would you suggest they go to get a better understanding of what tariffs will apply to them? And then just how to keep up with the information and how to know, I guess, if their supplier is really giving them the right information. So Rosemary, you want to weigh in there?
Yeah, you know, since the beginning of the Trump administration, there have been over 143, I think, executive orders that have been signed regarding trade policy and tariffs. And so you know, it's just an enormous amount of information, really hard to keep up with. So if you're in a specific industry, my recommendation is to work with your customs broker about the specific tariff items that are related to your industry or the things that you're importing. Sometimes that means you can get a reclassification that may lower your duty rate. You may be able to have a strategy to take advantage of a foreign trade zone or a bonded warehouse to delay payments of the duties. You can certainly, our favorite thing is to look for domestic suppliers and improve the amount of US content that's in whatever it is that you're producing. So there are a lot of different strategies and approaches to dealing with the tariffs. Otherwise, I think it's kind of a waiting game. We recently interviewed 18 senior executives at the CEO level, and we asked them how are they dealing with the tariffs, and almost to a person, they told us they were taking a wait and see attitude. So they were not investing, they were not hiring, they were not doing anything because it's too volatile and unstable at this point. So, might be that you just wait, pay the tariffs, and do the best you can until we get through this particularly political atmosphere.
And Rhett, what would you offer to manufacturers in terms of how they can just keep up with this and understand it? Rhett, you're on mute. I'm sorry.
There we go. We are customs brokers, as is Shannon, and custom brokers can offer suggestions on your duty classification. Keep in mind, though, that if customs comes in and audits, we need to prove that the importer actually confirmed the duty rates. But there are some strategies we've seen. One thing you can do is ask for a binding ruling, and in that case, you would present a case why you think your product may not be subject to certain tariffs and duties. You prepare a report and you send it into customs, and they will review that, and potentially they will grant you the requested reduction, and that will be binding. So if you're planning a project and you want to make sure that you won't get caught with unexpected cost and duties, that's one strategy you can take. Also, the government has what they call centers of excellence and expertise, and they specify these are specific to industries and products, and that you can have discussions with them as well. You can go directly to them and ask questions, and they can give clarification if there's any question on your product and what duties are applicable. The other issue is what price are you using for the value, and the value is what the duty is based on. So if you're getting information from your supplier from overseas, you need to make sure that it's a legitimate price. The rule is trust but verify, and customs will hold importers responsible if there's manipulation of pricing. So be careful there. But again, the rule is trust but verify. Make sure that the price is valid and legitimate. But binding ruling is a good strategy, and direct contact with the Cs, Centers of Excellence and Expertise at Customs, as well as working with your customs broker.
Thank you, Rhett. Next, we're going to bring in Shannon and ask her to kind of elaborate a little bit more on some of the points that you and Rosemary have touched on about the role that a customs broker plays in managing tariff-related issues for importers.
Yeah, to add to what Rhett had just mentioned about filing binding rulings and helping you with your valuation, some of the roles that people think of a customs broker is to simply file an ISF or an advanced importer security filing, to just file your customs entry and pay duty. But in reality, the role between the broker and the importer is much more complicated. While customs brokers are versed in tariff classification, usually willing to assist, the onus of the responsibility is still the importers. The 1993 MOD Act introduced two new terms: informed compliance and reasonable care. U.S. Customs published a reasonable care informed compliance publication comprised of about 60 plus questions, which you can find on the internet or we can share with you after the webinar. The MOD Act states that the importer of record is responsible to use reasonable care to enter, classify, and determine the value of imported merchandise, and to provide any other information necessary to enable customs to properly assess duties, collect accurate statistics, and verify that all legal requirements have been met. Your broker is only as good as the information provided on the customs invoice or data provided elsewhere. You know your product, the material construction, and your product's true intended use. It's possible that maybe your broker's made some assumptions about tariff classification for you based on their understanding or an internet search. It's also possible that you may have let this tariff classification coast historically because it's been a minimal duty impact. But now it's possible that it's a 50% increase because it's based on steel or aluminum, or maybe it's subject to an anti-dumping duty case. And now it's much more important to you to understand the duty impact. So I definitely encourage you to engage with your customs broker now instead of waiting for that duty increase. That being said, your broker must keep up with tariff changes in order to file the correct tariff sequence on your entry or 7501. Keep in mind that some items may require up to 10 tariffs currently, and Customs is programming ACE to accept up to 32 tariffs per entry line. Hopefully, we're not going to get to that point, but that should give you some glimpse of where this administration is headed. Any additional duty, as well as any exclusion from a tariff, has a unique harmonized tariff code or HTS, in addition to the Chapter 1 through 97 tariff number. And if steel or aluminum derivative reporting is required, then your broker must report that data on 2 entry lines. So as you can imagine, with up to 10 possible tariffs for one item, and you've got multiple SKUs on a commercial invoice, clerical errors are likely. And this is why it's important to review your entry summary upon receipt, understand how the tariffs work, and not just rely on your broker because it impacts your bottom line with regards to the duty payment. And as I mentioned earlier, the importer is the responsible party for the compliance. Also want to note that it's important that your broker is not required to pay duties and taxes for you by law. I strongly recommend that you pay duties directly to Customs, either by a duty check or ACH debit, which is the only way to guarantee duties are drafted from your account and your bond is satisfied. For credit reasons, your broker may elect not to front duties and taxes over a certain amount. So it's definitely imperative you're engaging in these types of discussions with your broker. A good customs broker will offer solutions to determine the least amount of duty while still maintaining compliance. They'll also help you determine a sufficient bond amount based on new duty forecasts for the next 12 months. And again, some of the other things that Rhett mentioned earlier about binding rulings and introductions to Cs and I guess in tariff classification as well.
Well,
All right, thanks, Shannon.
We've heard multiple, I think, kind of approaches from Shannon and Rosemary about tariffs and how to work with them, how to address them. Rosemary, are there any additional approaches you would suggest that might help a manufacturer actually lower their tariffs?
Yeah, we're seeing an awful lot of our clients that are considering alternate locations to manufacture. And one of them, as I mentioned, is Mexico. and that's because if you manufacture in Mexico, you use Mexican labor and Mexican parts, and that are the growth or produce of or production of Mexico. You may qualify for USMCA duty-free entry into the U.S. So that's a strategy that companies hadn't considered in the past, but may want to now, particularly if they have a high duty rate on their goods. I mean, we really don't know how long these high duty rates are going to last. It could be years. And so you have an opportunity to reconsider your strategy overall. The other thing that I would mention is that really looking at U.S. potential suppliers. So looking for the possibility that there are suppliers in the U.S. and sometimes that means you have to develop them as well. We know in the early 2000s, I've been in global supply chain management for 40 years. I'm also a licensed customs broker. But you know what we saw in the early 2000s was companies went in droves overseas, and so did their suppliers. So now we need to rebuild that supply base in the US, and that may mean that you can't just, look up someone to supply your part. You may have to redevelop that supplier and convince them to produce your part for you. So that's a lot of work. We usually tell our clients it'll take you 12 to 18 months to redevelop your supply base here. But it's a real possibility. I think the one exception may be electronics. Of course, we know that China, the Pearl River Valley, Shenzhen, Dongguan, Guangzhou, that megalopolis area just east and north of Hong Kong is where most of the electronics in the world are made. And we're going to be, I think, dependent on the manufacture of those electronics from China for a long time. Really hard to duplicate that. But we are seeing some manufacturing of electronics springing up here and there in some other countries. So I think, it's time to sort of take a step up, and instead of just operating on a day-to-day basis, to really rethink your global strategy. Where are you sourcing? Where are you manufacturing? How can you shift that picture so that you take advantage of American suppliers as well as the potential for duty-free imports from Mexico?
Fantastic. Well, we're talking about the future and you're mentioning future plans. Rhett, did you have any other strategies you can think of that might be deployed by a company as they're trying to think through their future and prepare themselves? Rhett, you're on mute.
My apologies again. Rosemary covered that quite well. What we've seen with some of our customers, the two options that are both immediate and long-term as well, and those are the use of bonded facilities as well as foreign trade zones. And we often get the question, what's the difference? And briefly, for bonded facility, you can use a commercial bonded facility. And what happens with a bonded facility is your products go into that. You do not pay duty. You will pay your harbor maintenance fee quarterly, but you defer the duty cost. The thing with the bonded warehouse is when you pull the products out of the facility, you pay the duty at the time of withdrawal. There is a time limit. You get a 3-year allowance and then 2 additional 1 year, so potentially 5 years. But you could put goods in and wait until the tariffs go away or changed or reduced, or the risk is they could go up. But when you come out of the bonded facility, you pay the duties applicable at that time. The difference, the one issue with bond is you cannot manipulate the goods. You can ask for manipulation and do labeling and that sort, but basically you cannot manufacture them. The other option is to use a foreign trade zone. And in the foreign trade zone, you put the goods in. You can use either a commercial foreign trade zone, which will not allow you to manipulate, or you can have a manufacturing foreign trade zone in which you can bring the goods in. The duty is applicable at the time of entry into the foreign trade zone. But with the manufacturing foreign trade zone, if you actually manufacture, then you will come out under a different tariff number with a different product. And so the duty will be applicable to the product that comes out of the foreign trade zones. It's the duty that was applicable when it went in, but because it's a different product, say if you're bringing in bearings and motors and expensive components, but you come out with a manufactured product, which could have a significantly lower duty rate, then you will pay the duty applicable to the finished product that was applicable when it went in. And in some cases, it can save substantial amounts of duty for customers. there's some other things as well that go on. Sourcing obviously is a good way to avoid duties depending on where you're buying. And there's of course a first sale rule, but Shannon's probably more experienced on that and can explain. But the bonding, bonded warehouses and foreign trade zones are two big items that have become very popular in the recent years.
Thank you. So Rosemary, I was going to ask if a manufacturer is seriously considering resourcing, could you just quickly tell us maybe what are some of the initial steps they need to think about if they're going to use this as a long-term strategy?
Yeah, so reshoring is an idea that's been around for a while. As I mentioned, we've been doing this for 11 years now. Um, so the first thing that we do with our clients is to consider the bill of material and the amount of labor that goes into production. So once again, this is an area where a lot of our clients hadn't really gone through this process before, but you have to take a step up and start thinking about the strategy of the company a little bit in order to move forward. So we look at the bill of materials, we determine how much of the cost of producing that product is labor and how much is materials. If your labor is more than 50% of the cost of the product, then you need to look for a low cost labor market. There's just no way we can compete in the US on labor costs if you have a lot of labor. So let me give you an example. If you are making men's shirts and you sell them to, say, Target or Walmart or J.C. Penney or somewhere, that requires you're assembling shirts, a lot of people at sewing machines, sitting on plastic stools for 12 hours a day, sewing collars onto men's shirts. That's a lot of labor, and more than 50% of the content or the cost of the product is labor. However, if you're making textiles, so the fabric that goes into that shirt, textiles a fully automated industry. If you've ever been in a textile plant, there's nobody there. It's just all machines making fabrics and different kinds of textiles. So in that case, the labor content's very low. And that means that you can consider a lot of different locations around the world, including the US, because you have an automated production environment that doesn't require so much labor. In the US, we have a minimum wage of in Georgia, I believe it's about $7.50 an hour, something like that. And around the country, it can be much higher than that. Compare that to labor rates in, say, in China, about $3.63 an hour. In Mexico, it's even lower. In a lot of countries around the world, lower yet. So, you got to look at the overall economics and do the analysis to determine whether or not your product has a big labor content, and if so, what do you do or where do you source that labor? Or if it has a small amount and you can automate your production, then you have an opportunity to look for potential suppliers in the US. So that's always the first step that we do, is that first analysis, so you fully understand your product and how much labor goes into it. Then finding US suppliers, so we do a lot of that kind of work also. Will help clients, say, find their top 10 components by either strategic components or by value. So we'll help them locate US suppliers that are in existence now or are willing to take on a new production line, or producing your product in some way or another. And then we also look at locations across the country. Georgia happens to be a very attractive environment overall, not only because of the business environment is very proactive, and like the MEP can help with a lot of business decisions, but also because the labor rates are relatively inexpensive and there's room to grow and, build new factories and so forth. So, we help our clients through those kind of decisions as well to determine where they should be, in fact, manufacturing. So it's a bigger decision than simply looking at the tariffs, the yes or no answer to a tariff. It's really rethinking your strategy and thinking more broadly about the world. And that's kind of a leap. A lot of us have been down in the trenches importing and dealing with day-to-day operations, and now we have to add strategy to our workload.
Yeah.
But it's the direction the world's moving.
Yeah, well, that's really interesting and helpful advice to think about. And the other piece to this is we've talked already a lot about strategy is, Shannon, what do you think about what should businesses, manufacturers be keeping in mind in terms of minimizing tariff costs legally? What would be your input on that?
Sure, Sandy. So there's a number of duty saving strategies companies can use to conserve cash and lower their customs duties and tariffs. Rhett mentioned the first sale rule earlier, which is where a qualifying transaction may be based on the purchase price between a middleman and the manufacturer invoice rather than the price paid by the importer to the middleman. So this is resulting in a lower duty bill because it's the first sale value that is used for the entry value. First sale methodology has been long used with industries with high tariffs, mainly apparel and footwear historically, but its utilization has increased dramatically recently as companies seek to lessen the impact of increased tariffs. Another strategy to lower duty impact is the use of the Chapter 98 and Chapter 99 exclusions. For example, products that have been exported from the US and returned to the US within a 3-year period, regardless of the country of origin, are exempt from import duties under heading 9801. So it's not just for US goods returned. And the value of US components in a product assembled abroad can be deducted from the total dutiable value of that good when it's imported to the US under heading 9802, if it's sent back for a repair or a warranty. Chapter 98 has lots of really good specific provisions for temporary imports. It's also got actual use provisions eligible for duty-free treatment, such as items for use by educational or religious institutions, items specifically manufactured for use by handicapped persons, and machinery and equipment and implements for agricultural or horticultural use. Chapter 99 has specific exclusions set forth by the president based on specific commodities. Here's where you're going to find the exclusions to the reciprocal tariffs for informational materials such as paperwork and documents or for certain relief donation items. If the U.S. content of an article comprises at least 20% of the customs value of the imported article, I think Rosemary hit upon this earlier, then there's an exclusion to avoid duties on the U.S. content. And then products subject to what's currently 50% duty on the steel and aluminum duties based on the cost of the metal are eligible for an exclusion so that you do not pay reciprocal duties on the non-metal content. As I mentioned earlier, each of these exclusions or special use provisions are notated on your entry summary as a separate HTS. So this is how you're going to check your entry summary to see if these provisions or exclusions have been applied to your particular import. So these are just some of the other examples you can take advantage of immediately without having to consider reshoring, bonded warehousing, or duty drawback. Also really, really good viable strategies, but most of those do have a longer lead time and are more complicated to execute.
Well, thanks,
Yeah.
Shannon. Excuse me, I guess.
Can I add one thing there?
Go ahead.
Shannon covered that quite well. For customers who are buying on a CIF value, in the US, the transportation costs are not dutiable. So it's always good to have your supplier line item the transportation costs, mainly ocean freight, and the duty is applied to the FOB origin port value. And so that's a good way to say, because you don't want to pay duty on the ocean freight.
Very true.
Right. Well, I guess as a follow-on question, Shannon, to what you were saying earlier, you mentioned exclusions. So how is that different than exceptions, or is it by country or material? Because we get that question as well. How could you find out if your product is truly just exempt?
Yeah, I think the trade world tends to use the word exclusion, but it's really also an exception as well. I think the easiest way to find out if a product is exempt is to check to see if your harmonized tariff number is on the annex list, which is available on whitehouse.gov. Tariff numbers on the annex are excluded from the reciprocal tariffs, and these are generally for pharmaceuticals, critical minerals, energy products, copper, semiconductors, certain lumber articles, items which are already paying 50% on the metal content, and automobiles and auto parts already subject to Section 232 additional tariffs. Currently, all countries are subject to a 10% base reciprocal tariff unless a product is on the annex. And reciprocals are the controversial tariffs that you keep hearing about on the news most often right now. These are the ones that are expected to change on July 9th and will probably fall to a country-specific tariff. Personally, I don't think you're ever going to see tariffs drop down lower than 10%, very similar to a VAT that you pay in most other countries. For the time being, the only new country-specific tariffs in place are on China, Canada, and Mexico, as they are also subject for, as Rosemary mentioned earlier, the fentanyl tariffs, or more formally, IEEPA. Products of Canada and Mexico under the USMCA remain eligible to enter the U.S. without paying IEEPA, but non-USMCA qualifying products of Canada and Mexico are still subject to the IEEPA 25% additional tariffs. It's important to note that the annex list does change and is being constantly reviewed and updated. Also, the list of iron and steel and aluminum tariffs is constantly changing. I was on a call yesterday and Customs is talking about adding so many new products to the derivatives list. Even the tiny piece of foil that is on a package of wet wipes will eventually have to be reported. It's being targeted on the list. And if you're wondering why the cost of beer has already gone up at your local grocery store, it's because the value of the aluminum in the cans must be reported, and the duty on that is 50%. So my advice to you, if you have products that are made out of any kind of aluminum or steel, start building a costed bill of materials for every unique SKU. You need to know where your metal is smelt, cast, and poured, as it may not be the same as the country of origin of your finished good. And keep in mind that metal from some countries, especially China or Russia, is subject to higher duties. So you need to pay special attention to where raw materials are sourced. So it's kind of the long answer of how to look to see where it's exempt, but kind of gives you some ideas of where to look going forward.
Fantastic. Well, appreciate the detail on that and, the guidance that you've offered to those on the call.